Hi everyone. I'm going to be talking about the content of your pitches and specifically walking you through this handout we gave you on what might your pitch include. So in the context of a startup pitch, probably all of these elements would be included, and the particular content of the pitch would be specific to what the company is pitching for, which could be advisors, it could be a joint ventureship or partnership, it could be a startup competition. The most common thing that startups pitch for, of course, is money through investments. But that's why the context of this assignment through this class is a little bit different than a traditional startup pitch. So I'm going to be walking through the 10 elements here on the handout and giving a little bit more detail and what differentiates this from the context that you might see in another startup pitch context. So among these elements, as the introduction says, they are not required elements and they're not in any sort of required order. So your team should determine which among these is appropriate for your project and your topic. If there are others that are not on this list, please feel free to include them. But if there's something here that doesn't seem to fit with what you're doing, you can feel free to skip it. So the first thing is one that we do recommend. It's not required, but it would be surprising not to have it, is a cover slide with the name of your company or service or product and the names of your team. Don't forget to include the contact information so that if you have some investor who stumbles upon this presentation and wants to pay you $1 million after graduation to pursue this, that there's, of course, a way to get in touch with you. In addition to the name of your company or innovation, think about whether it might make sense to use a tagline. The tagline for YouTube is broadcast yourself. The tagline for Uber is everyone's private driver. Particularly if the idea isn't obvious from the name of the company, this really helps people get a better idea of what specifically it is that you're talking about. And speaking of that, number 2 on the list is a summary. An executive summary is a great idea to include on your memo. You might include it either verbally or as one of the early slides in your pitch deck. Sometimes people are worried about the element of surprise, but I can tell you that the element of comprehension is much better than the element of surprise. I've watched hundreds of pitches and I can't tell you how many times I've been sitting there a few minutes into the pitch, still racking my brain to try to figure out what it is exactly that they're doing. I have some vague idea that it's about kidney disease, but I really don't know whether they're solving the disease or talking about communications among doctors or the collaborations between doctors and insurance companies. It's very difficult to figure out, to process what's happening if you can't figure out what they're talking about. So think about using previewing and signposting as a way to help your audience through the things that they're about to hear from you. Number 3 on the list is problem, and of course this is one of the most important elements. Get people engaged in what it is you're trying to solve. Think about how you can describe it in a way that makes them invested and makes them wait with bated breath to hear what your solution is going to be. Storytelling here can be a very compelling tool. You can assume a certain level of knowledge of the audience. For this particular project, your audience is your peers, and then the evaluators, which include the teaching team and our panel of judges. So you can assume they have a basic familiarity with vocabulary. You don't have to explain what a 1L is, for example. But don't assume too much pre-knowledge, because that makes it hard for people to feel like they really understand why should they care and why should they do specifically what you're suggesting they do. And that leads us to number 4, which of course is a solution. This is what you're proposing. And the more concrete you can be, the better. If you're talking about something that's going to happen, show how that's going to happen. We don't expect you to develop an app for this class, but you could do screenshots of what it would look like at different places, or you could do a demonstration, show a diagram, give examples, use a case study. Again, storytelling is a great way to make people feel like they can connect with the problem and the solution. And the more specific you can be, the better. Number 5 on the list also deals with specificity. Think about your addressable market. So everyone wants to think that the entire world wants their idea, but think about the difference between saying that your target market is law school students, for example, versus saying that your target market is law school students in the US who attend a top 10 school who have a background in hard science. The second group is smaller, of course, but it's much more compelling because it shows that you've really thought about things and really made an effort to tailor your product to a specific group that would be the most likely people to use it. And it's entirely possible that it would be applicable to people outside of that target group, but who were you going to focus on first? Where at all possible, talk about the size of that market. That would usually be done in either a number of users or the annual spend that people are already doing in that market. So for example, what is the number of people who are U.S. law students in the U.S. who are attending top 10 schools who have a background in hard science? Ballpark numbers are fine, but specificity and giving a sense of what that market size might be can be really important. Or talk about how big the market is. How much do people already spend in this particular industry? How much are law firms spending on CLE in the state of California in a year, for example? The internet can definitely be your friend when it comes to finding those kinds of answers. Think about your go-to-market strategy. How are you going to take your idea from the idea into its full enactment? Think about whether there might be licenses or permits that are required. If your idea deals with accrediting law schools, think about the process for that, how that happens. If your idea deals with the way that lawyers practice law, think about the state bar associations, for example. If your idea has anything to do with academia, think about the way that universities and law schools function. Think about faculty approval, things like that. So really show that you've taken a survey of barriers to entry and how you're going to get it past them, how you're going to make your stakeholders your advocates, and how you're going to make them want to do what it is that you're saying you're going to do. And once you've gotten past whatever approvals there need to be, how will you actually make your end users want to use your product or service? So will you use social media, or will you tie it to something that they're required to do, like licensure or law school graduation or the MPRE or something like that? How will you advertise essentially and make sure that your end users know about you and that your customers want to use your product or service? Number 6 on our list is milestones and projections. Think about whether it might make sense to talk about doing this in stages. Pilot programs are very attractive to people. Everyone likes to say that they're piloting something. Think about whether you might beta test it with a certain group, then roll it out to a second stage, which is a subset of your target group, then roll it out again. Again, this just shows that you've put some thought into how this might actually be implemented. If you could do projections for saying we would see X number of users by X date, or we would include the following, we would include AmLaw 50 firms by such and such a date, other firms after that. Anything like that helps break it down to show that you understand that businesses are on a trajectory and that it doesn't go from 0 to 60 automatically. Number 7 is competition. Every idea has competition, so don't make the mistake of saying you have no competition. I've seen people pitch before where they say, well, we're first to market, so there's no competition. We're the first ones to think of this. But everything has competition, even if it's just the status quo. I would challenge you, though, to go beyond the status quo, to think, too, what other companies or entities are out there that might also want to be in this space or might be coming up with this idea on their own. Would those be partners with you? Would they be competitors? If they're partners, what would you likely work with them on? If they're competitors, how would you differentiate what you're doing from what's already there? So think about competition. Number 8 is the business model. Again, we're not expecting you to run this company as your endeavor after law school or even for the purposes of this class, but think about the money. Who would pay for this? How will you generate revenue? Even if you're operating in a nonprofit, that just means you don't make profit. It doesn't mean you're not bringing in money to run the operations of your organization. So if the end users are not paying for it, who is paying for it, and why are they motivated to do that? Think about pricing strategy. Would you be a high-end premium product that people are willing to pay more for because of prestige or particular value or quality? Or are you going for a low price point to get quick market penetration very quickly across a wide band of users? Think about what the price point might be. Again, specificity shows thoughtfulness. So how can you think about whether it might make sense to name a specific price point and then show how that compares with what else is in the market or what competitors are doing, or how that relates to the specific value that you're bringing to the customer and end user. Number 9 is financing. Again, this is very different than what you would see in a startup pitch where they were pitching for investors to invest in a company. So for this context, what we're really looking for is, if it's appropriate, how much money would it take to get your idea going, and what would you use that money for at different stages? In other words, is there X amount of dollars that would be able to launch the prototype of your product, and then X number of dollars later, along a certain timeline, you could take the next step. Again, research here it's understandable that it would be ballparked, but it just shows that you guys have really dug in and really thought about this. And then finally, number 10 is team. In a startup pitch competition, no matter what construct you're using, team is one of the most important things that you would talk about. Almost everyone, from lawyers to investors, would say that an A team with an average idea is far preferable to a B-level team with an A-level idea. So here, the team may or may not be appropriate to include. If there are people on your team who have particular expertise in the topic that you're talking about, if they have past work experiences that relate, maybe that's a good thing to include. You could talk about that from the point of credibility for why your solution is likely to be feasible. And remember, feasibility is one of the 3 things you're being evaluated on: creativity, feasibility, and presentation. Or you could talk about why your team members' expertise is a reason why this is particularly likely to be adopted, for example. Beyond the team members who are in the actual class, you might also talk about people that you interviewed to get information here, advisors that you've consulted, and things like that. But if it doesn't feel like it's an appropriate fit for your particular project for the topic that you've been assigned, just skip this one. It's not worth shoehorning in something that's not fitting. So what we want to say as an overall message is, again, to reiterate, these are elements that we could expect might be included in either your pitch or your memo that goes along with your pitch. Think about whatever is appropriate for yours and custom tailor it appropriately, and we wish you the best of luck. We can't wait to see your ideas.